This happened to me back when I was 15 at my overnight summer camp. My friend and I have told very few people about this, and no one knows what to make of it. We were part of a counselor and training program that put us working at different activities or cabins in order for us to learn how to be staff. During my 3rd week, I was placed on a cabin of 12 to 13-year-olds, while a good friend of mine was placed on 8 to 9-year-olds. During my week on this cabin, one of the actual staff was fired for a bad reason, but it had to be done. Basically, he was supposed to be on night duty, and a girl got sick. And even though her counselors were in the cabin at the time, he got in trouble for not being there because he left 10 minutes early. At this time, another one of the 3 original staff had to be in the city for a family event and had a few days off. This left one counselor and myself watching 16 kids. On Saturday nights, we had staff meetings that were mandatory. My unit head and the camp director said that I could have the day off from working if I spent a night in the cabin with the kids, since the staff won't be there. I was told I could bring a friend who would also get a day off the following Monday. We would be with the kids until about 2 a.m. because the staff could sleep in the next day, and these meetings ran late. So my previously mentioned friend and I ate with the cabin, took them to the evening program, and then got them into the cabin at curfew. They didn't have to go to bed, but they had to stay in the cabin and be quiet. Before we went to bed, the older counselor in trainings at the campfire on night duty needed help starting a fire. I was pretty good at this, so I helped them build it properly. It was a very dry week, so you'd expect for the wood to catch pretty quickly, but for some reason it didn't. The lighter wouldn't even burn the kindling at the bottom. But since it was such a nice night, they decided to go without the fire. Around 11, the boys all fell asleep, which was rather unusual for boys who enjoyed staying up late. My friend and I stayed in the counselor's cube playing cards until it was time for us to get some sleep. Around midnight, it started getting very cold, but by then the counselors in training at the campfire had left. Half an hour later, we were both still awake when it started. At first, I thought that it was the wind and the trees, but then I realized it was whispers coming from the cabin. I got out of bed to go quiet down to the camper, but as I checked each camper, I realized that they were all whispering. The part that freaked me out was that they were all fast asleep. My friend came out to investigate as well, and it took us a few minutes to really hear what they were whispering. Not in unison, but in a round. They were whispering, "It's coming, it's coming, it's coming." This is when we got really scared. We tried to wake them up by dropping things so it looked like we accidentally woke them up, but nothing worked and the whispering continued. After about 5 minutes of us panicking, all the boys woke up in a cold sweat, staring at our frightened faces. We didn't want to tell them what happened, so they wouldn't be scared. We didn't sleep that night, but the boys did, and we didn't hear any more noises. The next morning, when we went for breakfast, I asked if anyone had any dreams, which I usually do to start a conversation. One boy started saying that he had a dream of something in the woods that he couldn't see, but he felt getting closer and closer to the cabin. As soon as the thing touched the door handle, he jolted awake. The table went quiet as a few other boys spoke up, saying that they had a very similar dream. Okay, so first off, I have to say that I'm not actually supposed to be talking about this stuff for privacy purposes, but I have to tell someone, anyone. I work at a psychiatric hospital. Let's just call it Sunnybrook. After working at Sunnybrook for a bit, I was given access to patient files. And I found that the special cases are sometimes disturbing. Here's the first truly disturbing one I found. This is the case of a 6-year-old girl. Her ID number is 5162, so I'll just use that. 5162's mother admitted her child into the hospital. The mother was quite distressed, claiming her child was possessed by a demon. She says that she can no longer care for her daughter. She has tried priests, exorcists, holy water, and the hospital was her last chance. 5162 was brought to room 83, and upon initial observations, she seemed to be an ordinary child, not showing any of the symptoms her mother described on page 2. She went to her scheduled therapy session at 3:30 p.m. After early examination, I believe that she has schizophrenia. She shows signs of hallucinations, delusions, and lack of emotion. This may explain why her mother thinks she has been possessed. 5162 admitted to killing her baby brother. She would not say why. She told me that she has to kill her mother for locking her up. I called security shortly after and had them escort her to her room. On the way back to her room, she attacked the security guard. The guard recounts, "I went to the doctor's room and walked with the girl. The doctor said to secure her wrist, but she's a kid, so I didn't. But, after all I've seen here, I should have known better. I had her follow me to the room, and then when I turned around, she was just gone. So I ran back, and there she was, just holding a painting. And I asked her what she was doing, and she just started running at me and screaming and said that she needed to kill all the doctors to escape." 5162 was finally escorted to her room, and her door was secured. During the night rounds, another guard heard sounds and investigated. She had removed all of the heads from the dolls, and she was clawing them apart with her hands. Her privileges were removed. Medication has drastically improved her condition. She has gone 3 weeks without incident, and she has been given supervised access to the playroom with patients 5165 and 5133. During a shift change in the playroom, 5162 beat another patient to death in 26 seconds. This is a transcription of what the camera saw. 5162 plays with the other 2 children. The supervisor leaves the room for his shift change. Camera switches. Supervisor walks down hall to other supervisor, 2 doors down. They greet. Screams are heard, and both supervisors run to playroom. Camera switches. 5162 watches supervisor leave room. She stands quickly, grabs the 4.5-pound dollhouse and raises it over her head, smashes it onto 5165 with incredible force. Her face seems enraged and is red. 5133 starts crying and screaming, and the other one is passed out and bleeding. 5162 starts screaming that she needs to kill everyone to escape. She grabs a piece of broken dollhouse and proceeds to beat and stab 5165. Supervisor's in her room and grab 5162, and she thrashes and stabs supervisor on the arm, and the supervisor continues restraint. The second supervisor holds 5165's wound shut, and after checking a pulse, they both escort 5162 to her room. 5133 remains crying until supervisor escorts to therapy. 5162 is put into a straitjacket eventually, with increased medication. At 2:46 a.m., according to security cameras, the patient escaped the straitjacket by chewing through it. A guard made his rounds to her room at 2:53 a.m. and witnessed her attempting to strangle herself. Guard pulled 5162's hands free from the fabric and is bitten on the neck, drawing blood. The patient tore through the neck with her hands, and the guard passed out. When the commotion was noticed on security cameras, the other guards made their way to room 83 and noticed that she was gone. She escaped through the door that the first guard did not close. The patient has not been found. Security is on high alert, and their safety is a priority. At 5:14 p.m., 5162 was found dead behind East stairwell. She had slit her wrist vertically and was lying in her blood. While I omitted the dates, it took almost 2 weeks for 5162 to be found, and her body was found in the first few days that I was working here. As you may guess, this one really freaked me out. Honestly, schizophrenia doesn't seem like a problem with her. She was only 6 years old. How could she kill her brother, a patient, and a guard? It has me considering the stuff her mother said about her. Being possessed. But, I don't know. I don't really believe in that stuff, and I'm not a doctor. I simply do the filing. There was no pearly gate. The only reason I knew I was in a cave was because I had just passed the entrance. The rock wall rose behind me with no ceiling in sight. I knew this was it. This was what religion talked about, what man feared. I had just entered the gate to hell. I felt the presence of the cave as if it was a living, breathing creature. The stench of rotten flesh overwhelmed me. Then, there was the voice. It came from inside and all around.
Welcome.
Who are you? I asked, trying to keep my composure.
You know.
The thing answered. I did know. You were the devil, I stuttered, quickly losing my composure. Why me? I've lived as good as I could. The silence took over the space as my words died out. It seemed like an hour went by before the response came.
What did you expect?
The voice was penetrating, but patient. I don't know. I never believed any of this, I uttered. Is that why I'm here? Silence. I continued. They say the greatest trick you ever pulled was convincing the world you don't exist.
No. The greatest trick I ever pulled was convincing the world that there is an alternative.
There is no God? I shivered. The cave trembled with the words.
I am God.
Recently, I began to do work with the fire department as an EMT in order to get healthcare hours to aid my application to medical school. Within the first 2 weeks, we got called out to our first fire response. Responding to a fire when working under the supervision of firefighters is about as good as it gets in our eyes. Everyone wants to see the firefighters kick doors down and run into burning structures. There's a bit of a mythical nature to fire in the eyes of first responders. I've heard stories of fire and the odd and strange things that happen in those situations since my first EMT class started. Many believe that fire caused physics to break down and things that happen don't quite add up. The firehouse I was working at was far from home, about an hour-and-a-half drive. I was outside smoking a cigarette when we got the call. A woman had called to report smoke rising in the desert just off a hiking trail in the mountains right outside of town. Where we live, the fire warning is literally at high all year round. I've never seen it drop. Brush fires in the desert, like forest fires, can be minor one second and be thousands of acres the next. Apparently, the call had been marked as a fire and possible SMI. SMI stands for severe mental illness. There wasn't a description for why it was labeled SMI, but that's why we were called out. SMI individuals are not capable legally of refusing transport to the hospital, so we have to take them. The fire and call had reportedly been marked at a trail in the mountain. After a little hiking, we finally got to the spot where we believed the call originated from. Dispatch had attempted to regain contact with the caller as we approached the scene, but was unable to. The closer we got, the stronger I could smell the stench of charred wood, but we didn't see any smoke. This is unusual because fires big enough to generate that smell are almost always too big to go out on their own. And on top of that, fires spew smoke for hours after they are put out, unless the burnt area is literally saturated with water or flame retardant chemicals. There was no sitting water anywhere, as we were on the side of a desert mountain. As we got to the area, we saw no sign of the caller, but definite signs of a fire. As we approached a flat area, we saw a large circle with a diameter probably 15 to 20 feet. It was surrounded on all sides by large pine trees. All the trees were scorched and burnt on the sides facing the circle, but had no burn marks on the other side. The ground in the center was vastly different than the rest of the soil outside of it. Because of the lack of rain, the ground is very hard and cracked, but the dirt in the center of the circle was almost like a fine powder resembling sand. At the center of this was a dead boar. Usually these animals have an unholy stench you can smell for hundreds of feet, but this one had no noticeable smell. As we got closer, we noticed how high the burn marks went up on the trees. These trees were probably 60 feet high, and the scorch marks went up most of the way. I recall a firefighter making a comment about how a fire that high should have generated enough heat to incinerate the dry pines. We all knew this didn't make any sense because of the way the trees were burned. The fire must have originated from something in the center of the circle, but there was literally nothing in the center other than the dirt and unburnt pig. A firefighter got closer to the boar and put a foot on it to roll it over. As soon as he touched it, we noticed how swollen the body was, full of decomposing gases. It had obviously been dead for some time. Its feet and part of its legs were so badly burnt that black skin was beginning to peel away to reveal charred bone underneath. The rest of the body was unscorched. As he moved the corpse a little more, we noticed a wig peeking out beneath it. We froze, and a tingling fear washed over us. A couple firemen and the other paramedic broke away from the group and began to talk quietly with each other. As I walked closer to get a better look, I could see what made the firefighters so concerned. This was not a wig, but a detached scalp. This was someone's hair. It was so long, and it was golden brown in color, but there was more. There was a lower half of a jaw. We watched as the firefighters surveyed the surrounding area for signs of people or fire, and when they didn't see any, we got the okay to leave. Back at the firehouse, a couple days later on my shift, I walked into a conversation a paramedic was having with someone else about the hair we had found. Apparently, they think it belongs to the woman who originally called 911. She told the dispatch that she was hiking on the trail when she saw a huge flash of light and saw numerous small animals and birds heading for that direction. She followed and found a huge blazing fire. All of the animals in the area were running or flying into the flames, and as she got closer, she swore she could see silhouettes of animals and even people just standing there in the fire, just standing there. At this point, she was quite hysterical and kept yelling about how she had to help them and how All the animals were still coming into the fire, walking right around her as she stood. Then she began to yell about all the children and how they shouldn't have to see these things. The poor children, she had said. They are going to be scarred for life from this. Shortly after, the dispatcher lost contact with the caller. They believed that she just walked directly into the flames. Somehow she was totally incinerated except for her hair and that part of her jaw. They found no other traces of her and no tracks leading anywhere else. They had an arson investigator come to the scene, and his assessment was that the fire was of unknown origin, of unknown fuel, and claimed one life. And what's really weird is they found no ash on the hair, the pig, the dirt, or the trees. There was no trace of any other person or animal other than that one woman. Her death was ruled accidental due to fire, but they didn't have a body to examine. I've often heard people say that the day they got a cancer diagnosis was the worst day of their life. That wasn't the case for me. It wasn't that I was happy about it or anything. Rather, I was so shell-shocked and phased out that it did not get through to me. I went on for about a week like this, so overloaded by the new information that I basically short-circuited and was running on autopilot. I remember the day that the full truth really dawned on me. It happened unexpectedly and all at once. I was out walking my dog, still running on autopilot, when a brick wall of emotions collided with my brain. I was physically and emotionally thrown to the ground. I sat there for about an hour, getting a mixture of judgmental and sympathetic looks as I released all of the built-up emotions from the last week. Once I let it all out, I stood up and continued to walk my dog. Most people in my situation would probably go through all the emotions that normally occur after a serious diagnosis. Call their loved ones, make a bucket list, spend time with their family. Not me. I just did what I've always done. Shoved those feelings right back where they came from and continued to live my life as if nothing was wrong. As if I didn't have only 3 months to live. You see, I was diagnosed with a very rare and a very aggressive cancer called cholangiocarcinoma. I had known for about 2 years that something was wrong with me. I was having all kinds of strange physical symptoms I had never experienced before. I was in and out of the doctor's offices constantly, and doctors, of course, did not seem to take my concerns seriously. By the time they did listen to me, it was too late. They told me I had 3 months to live, maybe a little longer if I went on chemo. I'd seen my uncle go through chemo. I was not going to put myself through that just to live a few more agonizing months. So I declined. As I said before, I did not process this information as a normal person would. I didn't make plans to see my family or go skydiving. Instead, I chose to get lost in my favorite vice, social media. Before the diagnosis, I was constantly on my phone, completely absorbed by apps like Facebook and Instagram. I would scroll endlessly, desperately looking for something that I knew wasn't there. After the diagnosis, though, I found that social media was the only thing that gave me some kind of comfort. I would completely immerse myself in it, hours passing without me realizing, somehow oblivious to the time while I stared at the clock in my hand all day. The thing about apps like Facebook is that there is literally no end. So I would scroll day in and day out, fiendishly looking for that momentary dopamine fix that would temporarily numb the pain and take me away from my hellish situation. One day, as I was mindlessly scrolling, an ad caught my eye. Now, I have heard of Facebook ads that creepily seem to correlate exactly with something going on in your life or something you had mentioned to a friend. I've had that happen myself on a couple occasions, but this was a whole new level. The page that posted the ad was simply titled Life. The ad read, "Life, your trial is about to expire." Underneath was a counter with bold red numbers. The counter read 2 months, 2 weeks, 5 days, 3 hours, 40 minutes, 14 seconds. It took me a minute to process the significance of those numbers, but when I did, time seemed to stop. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight, bile rose in my throat. I could feel my hands getting clammy. It had been 12 days since my diagnosis. After staring dumbfounded at the screen for a few moments, my terror began to subside as the rational part of my brain started to take over. Obviously, this is some kind of strange coincidence, I told myself. Even if it wasn't, what are the chances that the doctor had predicted my death exactly down to the day? Even so, I decided to investigate the ad a little further. I clicked the link to go to the live Facebook page. It just led me to a 404 error page. I pressed the back button and observed the ad a little closer. I realized in the bottom right-hand corner where the sign-up link would usually be in a normal page was a link with "Save Yourself" written in red script. I hesitantly clicked the link. It redirected me to a new page. The first thing I noticed was that this page had no URL. The second thing that stood out was a terrible design of the website. It looked like a teenager made it in the early 2000s. The word "life" was once again emblazoned at the top of the page in bold red letters. Beneath was the counter, displaying almost the same time, but the minute and second counter to tick down. The only difference I noticed was that under the counter were two box links. One had a blue background with white font that said "Renew." The other sported a red background with a black font that read "Cancel." I stared for a moment, trying to understand what was happening and pondering what my next move was. I shakily hovered my thumb above the "Renew" button, and before I could talk myself out of it, I clicked. I was taken to a new screen with a sky blue background and white text that read, "Thank you for renewing your life subscription. Your monthly fee will be automatically deducted." Below was an "Accept" button. I almost clicked it, but then I realized above it was a checkbox that read "Auto Renewal." Most logical people in this situation would have just exited out of the website, but I have always been a curious person. I checked auto renewal and hit accept. The tab immediately shut down, and when I went to look for it again, it was nowhere to be found. Disappointed, I went back to my regular scrolling. A few days later, I had one of my weekly doctor's visits. I always thought these visits were kind of asinine. How many times do I need a doctor to tell me that I'm dying? This visit, however, it turned out quite a bit different than I expected. Some call it a miracle, others an act of God. But when I found out, I cried even more than I did for my diagnosis. The cancer was gone. Not regressed, not smaller. Completely gone. No one could explain it. I felt like a new woman with a new lease on life as I left the cancer center that day for the last time. I was on top of the world, untouchable. Until a few days later. Ironically, I got the phone call as I was walking my dog. The other driver was drunk. It was a head-on collision. My mom was gone before the debris even settled. My whole world was rocked and turned on its head. I live hundreds of miles from my mom, but I was closer to her than anyone in my life. A few days before her funeral, I was sitting around, going through my phone, when I decided to check my email. I had a message from a name that I didn't recognize called "Life is Great." I opened it and recognized the simple design and layout instantly. It simply read, "Your fee has been processed and your subscription has automatically renewed." Underneath was a single red button that read "Cancel." I realized the day I received the email was the same day as my mother's accident. I thought nothing of it. It's just a coincidence. My mother's funeral was beautiful. She was a very well-loved woman in her area, so it was very crowded. As the weeks passed, I slowly started to readjust to life without my mother in it. I decided to stay at my brother's house for a little while so we could comfort each other and help each other cope. It's what Mom would have wanted. One day as I was showering, I heard a loud bang from downstairs. I quickly threw on my robe and ran down. I hesitantly craned my head around the corner to peer into the kitchen. What laid before me was too gruesome for my mind to process at first. Have you ever seen what a 44 Magnum can do to a person? What was left of my brother sat at the kitchen table. The only reason I was still able to recognize him was the tattoo on the hand that held the revolver. I emptied the contents of my stomach onto the living room floor. As I stood back up and began to catch my breath, my phone chimed. I instinctively took it out to check. An email from Life is Great. Your fee has been processed and your subscription has been automatically renewed. My heart leapt into my throat. There was no denying what was happening anymore. I tapped the red cancel button. A message popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel Life? You have 0 days, 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds remaining if you cancel. Continue?